Hello everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Assalamu alaikum wa marhaba. Welcome to this interview for the Open Borders Institute. We are a small advocacy with the goal of changing perspectives on cross-border exchanges. This week, we welcome Alberto Alemanno. Hello, Alberto.
Hello, bonjour, buongiorno. Hello, everyone.
Alberto is the founder of The Good Lobby, and he is the Jean Monnet Professor of European Union Law at HEC Paris. He is a civic entrepreneur, a legal scholar, and a key political commentator. Alberto is also an expert on EU regulation and risk studies. He is the editor-in-chief of the leading academic journal, European Journal of Risk Regulation. Alberto is also a visiting professor in Bruges at the College of Europe, of which he is also an alumnus, and in Tokyo, where he resides a month every year to teach at the University of Tokyo School of Public Policy. We could have perfectly well conducted this interview in French, in Italian, his mother tongue, or in Spanish, actually, since he is a resident in the north of the country. Alberto embodies the values of Open Borders Institute as someone who has worked in the US, in Japan, in France, in Switzerland, in the Netherlands, or at home in Italy. Welcome, Alberto, for the Open Borders Institute.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
So, Alberto, I wanted to know a little bit about, starting from the beginning, what prompted this desire to live outside of Italy, to live abroad between different countries, to learn different languages? Were you someone who was excited about the European project? Was it something that was more global?
Yes, Adam, no doubt. I think I was lucky to be one of those who had an exposure to Europe. More than 20 years ago, European integration was pretty much a la mode. People like me coming from a modest background, just because they had the chance to go to university, were offered the opportunity to spend some time in another country. And I think that exposure gave me and my generation an awful lot of opportunities, and definitely changed my life as the life of millions of Europeans. We can even quantify that. We know that more or less there are more than 1 million kids who were born out of the Erasmus relation, so people who met during that particular year. At the same time, we all know that Erasmus is only for university students, so I was really privileged at the time. And that kind of Europe was a Europe where there was a major consensus in society that there was a positive correlation between lifting border controls and redistribution of economic wealth. However, this presupposition, I don't think fully realized, and the very same economic recipe behind European economic integration revealed partly faulty. There was not much redistribution happening across or within society. Certainly, there was from the west towards the east. There was much less from the north towards the south. But overall, we realized in the course of the few years, I would say that there was a sort of questioning of the incredible price that the European integration process put on mobility. In other words, in order to benefit from Europe, you need to become mobile. If you're not mobile, if you don't take advantage of these open borders, you are just sitting on the wrong side of the fence. And this premium of mobility is possibly one of the original sins of European integration. So if I ask you or any other who is listening to us, how many European citizens live in a different country than the country in which they were born? In other words, how much interstate mobility exists in Europe? Well, that figure is approximately 3.6%, which makes 15 million, which is a big number, but in percentage point is much less, especially when you compare it with the US equivalent number, which is approximately 25%. So in Europe, in 70 years' time, well, we managed to have approximately 3+% of the population that is taking full advantage of these open borders. But there's a second figure, which is very important, which is how many Europeans are exposed to another European country at least once a year because they have family, because they travel there for holiday or for work. But that figure is 50%. So as you can see, one citizen, one European resident out of two is fully enjoying Europe, or at least is exposed to Europe. But the other 50% is not. And I think this is what is making much more complicated for somebody like me to be a champion of mobility and a champion of open borders. I certainly am, but I also realize the dark side of European integration when it comes to his own original formula, which is to allocate all the factors of production in the most efficient way in order to create growth. In a moment in which we are questioning virtually everything of our economic, social, cultural system, it is pretty clear that time has come also to question the ordoliberal order and dogma which is behind European integration. It's not only about collecting and capturing economic growth that we are going to thrive as society, but also by giving value to many other positive dynamics, like household work or local politics, or social innovations and social enterprises happening locally. Well, all these phenomena are not captured by European integration. And Europe is quite bad actually at leveraging on these incredibly unknown, neglected phenomena, which are still thriving in Europe, but they are not under the radar, they are not fostered, and they are not necessarily benefiting from the open border philosophy. So in a word, the question is, how can we democratize the European integration formula by making it a bit more aware of its own colonial past, a bit more aware about this mobility premium, to make it a bit more aware of its own limitations, I think. So stop celebrating European integration per se, try to make it critically constructive remarks and studies and reflections in order to make it sure that we're going to have much more than 50% of the overall population exposed to other European culture. If not, this won't last long because there won't be buy-in any longer. And therefore, we need to accelerate in our integration by taking a different perspective.
Do you think that is this something that can be reached through social entrepreneurship in the sense of creating a public sphere, as Habermas would say, in the European community, that people would share, that they would have a kind of citizenship, a feeling of commonality? Or is that something different? Is it something that would rather be fostered through a social Europe? Or another possibility, is it because there is a certain kind of protectionism within countries with regards to workers coming from another one that is preventing people from actually enjoying the effects of European integration?
Well, it's an excellent question. I think that we need to take a picture of where we stand now. We have been united or integrated socioeconomically in an unprecedented fashion for over 70 years now. For 70 years, Europeans, in one way or another, they got closer and closer and closer because of the economy, but also because of society. As I was telling you earlier, we see more and more people taking European Union for granted. However, the European Union as we know it is still lacking what I call a critical democratic infrastructure. The critical democratic infrastructure is something that any polity or politeia might need in order to grow as a community or as a community of communities. And this critical democratic infrastructure has two major components. The first one is the one you alluded to, which is a common public sphere. We need to be informed and to be able to engage and to discuss about ideas that are actually crossing borders. And this is certainly the Habermasian idea of public sphere. But we need also a second one, which is significantly more neglected. We don't even talk about it, which is the creation of a European political space. And by that, I mean one single space, not 27 national competitions, allowing us to elect representatives who, having been elected at the national level, have no accountability mechanism vis-a-vis the effects of the policies they're going to be pushing for other countries.
This is
What I'm talking about is a Europeanization of the political space and a Europeanization of the public sphere. Unless we're going to Europeanize the terms of the debate, and we are not going to be Europeanizing who might actually embody those ideas by becoming our political representatives, it would be very difficult to move forward.
So I know, for instance, that this is a measure to which another person who's active in the European circles, Guillaume Clossat, has referred to in his book Une jeunesse européenne. I also know that this is an idea that Macron, President Macron, has proposed, the idea of transnational elections for the European Parliament. This is a measure that should be put in place, if I am correct. It is on track to be put in place.
Well, it's an old idea. It's an old intuition of federalists already in the 70s and 80s. Altiero Spinelli was dreaming of the creation of genuine European political parties who might have been putting forward competing ideas of European society and then getting elected all across Europe. That means that a German would be able to run all across Europe and be elected by Spaniards, Portuguese, or Slovenians, and a Slovenian could actually run and be voted by a Maltese and a Finn. This is not pure symbolism. This is the creation of a pan-European electoral competition that would force the pan-European sphere to emerge because these people would have ideas that would be covered by the media and that would tackle issues that are of common interest. Look at what Europe just went through over the last few years. An unprecedented pandemic. All Europeans, for the first time ever, they find themselves in the very same situation. We were all confined. We were all waiting for a possible vaccine to be developed. We were all waiting for that delivery to be actually to occur. We all felt that Europe was no longer a troublemaker, but it was a problem fixer, probably for the first time. So we had this kind of a common experience. However, we didn't really had a full common experience because even the COVID crisis was narrated in 27 different ways, and it was interpreted in 27 different ways by different political parties. Why this is problematic? Because it represents a structural obstacle to our understanding and possibility to feel European across borders, and to see that solutions might emerge out of our conversation. So we keep preventing ourselves from becoming full European and actually democratize Europe by actually reaching to the other 50%, by keeping these European debates just for those who are actually mobile, those who are affected because they spend time in another country. So no doubt that the creation of transnationalists, which is just a means to a broader end, which is the politicization of Europe, there are many other solutions we can think of, could be a stepping stone for allowing Europeans to actually feel European when they actually vote for the European elections. When you vote for the European elections today, you're voting on different dates. So the Dutch vote on Thursday, the French on Saturday, the Italians on Sunday. We vote for national parties running on national platforms and putting forward national candidates. So much for European politics, right? How we can move away from this model to a Europeanized, well, it's pretty simple. And that's what the proposal for a European electoral law by Dominic de Vesa, who is a socialist progressive member of the European Parliament from Spain, put forward, foresees the possibility for the first time, the previous attempt in 2018 failed, to actually give each European citizen 2 votes. So we're going to be voting for our national candidate, which might actually be running regionally, depending on the country in which you are. In France is now is a French college. In Italy is a regional one. In Germany is also regional. And the second vote would be a pan-European. So you would express another vote for candidates running all across Europe. So again, you would have a French being voted by an Italian being voted by all European who are entitled to vote. This would Europeanize the process. The problem with this solution is that it's very, very tiny. It would basically entail the election of only 20 plus MEPs out of 705. So it would be quite symbolic. in my view, would be enough to trigger a new dynamic, but it's the beginning possibly of a major transformation. There's been a lot of pushback over the years. I've personally been campaigning since my year at the College of Europe in the year 2000, when I met Frank Biancheri, who was the founder of AEG and also one of the founding fathers of the Erasmus project. I've been really advocating nonstop. We even set up transnational political parties in order to push for these ideas well before Volt, 10 years before Volt. And all of this has been a really fascinating battle that has been shared by few people. So now we see that the seeds we have implanted in this pretty fertile soil are finally blossoming. So let's see what is going to happen this year. But it's a bit of a moment of truth, 2022, 2023 in particular, for the preparation of the next European elections.
Are you not scared of a kind of nationalist backlash at measures that are seen as promoting a sort of federalism? I'm thinking, for instance, of the Italian election that's just happened and that has put in power a coalition of which Fratelli d'Italia is a member of.
Well, I'm never afraid of populism in the sense that I saw over the last few years, I witnessed the difficulties these parties do have to govern, right? They are very good at deconstructing in simple terms reality, but they're very bad at proposing solutions that in the long term satisfy people demand. When you look at what happened around European ideas today, Europe has never been so successful and so popular. Nobody dares to actually question whether the EU or France should actually belong to the European Union. There was a party in Italy that just Italexit didn't reach the threshold because nobody was voting for it. So what a better I would say proof of the fact that there's no longer appetite. And Giorgia Meloni, who is the incoming Italian prime minister, is now running on a platform which is anti-European, despite being very popular, very populist. So in a way, there has been a lot of embeddedness of European integration, even of the euro area, despite the contestation. The question is no longer whether we should remain into the European Union, but how we can.
So I'm thinking, so Alberto, you're the father of that's something that I did mention, that you are a successful scholar, an academic, a political commentator. You're also a father, which is something that I did not mention in your short biography. Um, well, I will actually continue on this point of you're someone that's looking at the next generation of Europeans with your children. At the same time, you've mentioned COVID. You've hinted at the war in Ukraine. Are you someone that's optimistic with regards to you speak about the EU today, but what about the EU tomorrow? I think it was Clément Beaune during his time as the Secretary of State for the European Union, that for European affairs, that said that l'Union européenne ne doit plus être un herbivore dans un monde de carnivores. That it shouldn't be a vegetarian in a world of meat eaters. So what is your perspective on that?
I don't think I'm optimistic, but I'm certainly hopeful, which is an attitude of possibility that in which I believe as an educator, as a researcher, as a scholar, and also as an activist. I think we see and we witness the mainstreaming of a lot of ideas which were pretty crazy ideas only a few years ago, from environmentalism to the protection of the planet, to rethinking the mission of the corporation, all the way to rethinking the role that governments and public administration should play. There's a lot of questioning these days, and in that sense, I believe those who claim that we are really in an epoch bridging era, right? We're moving into a new era. We are in an interregnum, like Antonio Gramsci used to say. The old is not really over because we're still into it, but we see the emergence of a new era, of a new power that is coming in. We cannot really detect its major feature, but it's certainly there. And in this interregnum, I think we cannot but being hopeful. It would be silly not to be hopeful and to seize the many opportunities we have by generating many more ideas. I think when looking at future generation, I'm really concerned about the inability of our imagination to create many more solutions. So in a way, we never had so many opportunities to actually reinvent and question our system. And now that we have it, we are not seizing it. So we are a bit intellectually lazy. We are very complacent, in particular in the North hemisphere. We are not really capable of being fully aware of this and trying to see what's next. And I think the next big thing will be to start caring about the future generation, not only caring about the people who do not have enough today. We certainly need to redistribute, but we also need to create a social vision that goes beyond redistribution, in particular for progressive forces. And here, being able to put on the agenda the interest of the future generation, which is very much something associated to the climate change, to the climate policy, is crucial. Because if you are not able to embed future generation interest into today's policy process by deciding to go for policy option A as opposed to B, because we are also thinking about the future generation, then we are curtailing our ability as a species to render our life on the planet meaningful for many more people to come. And I think this is a bit the next big thing, right? We are becoming vegetarian, we move into veganism, we have been paying attention to the planet, we've been paying attention to animal and to animal rights, which is one of the most fast-growing area of law and public policy. We are really trying to put into the animal space entitlements and even rights, which is a fascinating conversation. And now the next big step will be how we can recognize this future generation interest in our day-to-day decision-making. And any decision we're going to be taking today on climate has an impact on future generation, but how we can represent them, what kind of instruments in terms of institutional designs, what kind of groups we should mobilize, how can we make this happen? And this is exactly what I'm focusing on now in my own research. We recently published a call for papers at the European Journal of Risk Regulation. We already collected more than 30 new ideas on how to make this happen. And this is something going to keep me busy for the next 6 months at least, and hopefully for the future.
So the German sociologist Ulrich Beck, which has built on this notion of public sphere of Habermas, has spoken about the risk society and the challenges that our societies are facing, the new ones, and the new areas of policy that we need to invent. I'm curious about where you're positioning yourself with regards to this notion of risk society, this notion that Ulrich Beck has developed. Do you think that the future of politics is going to center itself around this notion of risk, these risks that supposedly in a risk society are supposed to come towards humanity at a faster and a grander scale with technological advancement continuing?
Well, I think Ulrich Beck, when proposes his big idea of looking and explaining power dynamics through the prism of risk as opposed to capital, that what the Marxists did, it was certainly after a great understanding of humanity, in particular of the north of the world. They basically realized that it was no longer the allocation of capital defining how people were experiencing life, but it was the allocation of risk. So if you know how to allocate risk as a system, as a society, well, you're going to be in control of people's life and you're going to succeed. Certainly, we have become much more risk averse as a society, which has rendered, I think, our policy choices significantly less risk-taking. That basically means that we reduce our exposure to risk, even in this absurd scenario of what we call zero risk, which we also saw at play during the COVID pandemic, a world in which people, and in particular political system, promise citizens that they can be fully protected and nothing can happen to that, because there is a tort system, meaning if something happened, there will be damages paid to you, there will be insurances covering you, there will be different liability regimes, and there will be courts. So at the end of the day, you can live in a world in which, despite being exposed, and perhaps even more exposed than in the past, given technological risk, you will be safe. Right, this kind of idea, I think, is still pretty much alive today. I think the explanatory power of the risk society remains extremely powerful today, perhaps more in certain society like the Japanese one, as opposed to the American one. But certainly you see that the role of risk plays an incredible role in allocating power and in defining who we want to be as a society. At the same time, you know, a lot of years have passed by. Ulrich Beck's final work focused on the global risk society. So you look at the global scenarios, he moved away from day-to-day risks, you know, car accident or planes or terrorist attacks, which were the initial focus of his work, by looking at these kind of ultra mega catastrophic risks that are very low probability, but should they ever realize, well, they would threaten humanity. And I think this should be the focus of our work today. And this is the link to be made between long-term thinking, long-termism, that serves, at least from the perspective of moral philosopher, to owe to the future generation some respect, and our analytical capability to unpack new challenges that are facing today. Only a couple of weeks ago, the media reported something incredible that I don't know why it didn't go viral. It didn't go viral. People didn't pay attention. But I don't know if you have noted, but there was a big rock hitting the planet Earth. It could have hit planet Earth, and the NASA decided to set up this mission, and they sent out this device, which has basically hit this rock and turn it into atomized particles, which potentially save an impact. So you see, there are already potentially catastrophic risks surrounding us. They're already materializing, but we don't seem to be ready as a society to face them. And for all those of us who have been watching, Look Up is the name of this movie. I think this provides us yet another exemplary explanation of, you know, today we are no longer surprised as a society. We are so short-termist that we don't even want to devote some of our bandwidth to thinking, you know, beyond our day-to-day thinking, comfort zone. Why don't we do it? We don't know, probably also out of complacency.
It's true that also these problems on a wider scale demand a multilateral approach. And that is something today that is difficult. On this question, some people have argued that the EU needed to look a little bit beyond its own borders. And there's been this proposition by President Macron, but this is related rather to a geopolitical issue of installing what they have called the European Political Community. Lucas here will ask you a question related to this event, which is happening today in Prague, that will finish actually in 2 hours. Lucas?
Alberto Alemanno. So in regards to the summit, this was actually an initiative which was launched by Macron to address the risk of, you know, potential of the conflict potentially inflaming the whole continent. And it was launched as well to address topics such as European energy and the problems surrounding energy in regards to Russia. And this 44-strong country summit was called by Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda the United Nations in Europe. It was quite a peculiar moment when it was announced, because there are many aspects to this summit, be it Ukraine's or Turkey's presence in a framework outside of NATO and the UN. The summit is also peculiar because it's the first time since Brexit that you will have a platform where the European Union and the United Kingdom are discussing policy. Anand Menon, director of the think tank, the UK in a Changing Europe, actually expressed his fears today that the European political community would be nothing more than a talking shop. So I was wondering, what are your predictions in regards to this summit? What do you make of it institutionally in regards to the European Union? Is there something tangible that could come out of it policy-wise? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucas, for your question regarding this novelty in the multilateral governance of the world, which is the European political community. It is probably too early to judge it and to actually come to terms to his own raison d'etre and to his own potential. My initial take as an observer is that it's probably a bad answer to an excellent question, which is what do we do with European integration beyond the 27 member states? I think the enlargement question has been pending for a long time. You might still remember President Sarkozy at the time vetoing Turkey after 15 years of association status and after almost 40 years of customs union. So the enlargement issue has been pending for too long, and I'm not sure that the European political community per se provides an answer which is meaningful for the future of enlargement. Certainly, today's summit is not an answer for Ukraine or Montenegro, who wants accession now or in a short period of time, but is not an answer to neighboring countries either, because they will know they will never become eligible to join the European Union. So there is a high risk, which I think is the risk that Anand Menon has been putting forward, that this summit won't satisfy anybody but Mr. Macron and perhaps his own constituency, who might say, again, in the short term, that they were able to bring at the table so many European leaders, virtually everybody but Mr. Putin, in the Eurasian region. So the question is, what are we talking about? What is this creature? Is it yet another forum for having geopolitical conversation? Is it a pre-accession or pre-accession process that might bring certain countries to get closer to the European Union? Is it a new neighborhood policy that established clarifying that these countries will never become fully member as we know it today, but it will be in a sort of second or even third circle of European integration? I think all these are open questions, and they are legitimate questions that won't find necessarily an answer at the end of the summit. When you look at the format of the summit, it reminds me a lot the typical European workshop we organize when we put together supposedly leaders coming from different sectors, and we give them different teams to talk, to get to know each other. The goal is not really to agree on anything, but the goal is to bring them together. In other words, the process is probably more important than the outcome. And that's where I see value in this exercise. And that's why we need to keep our expectations very low by saying probably this European political community won't become a new forum, won't become a new enlargement process. It won't become a pre-accession dynamic, but it will certainly allow us to keep a channel open at the time in which these channels are closing up among the European Union and many other countries who still look at the European Union as a possible model, but they also realize that in terms of realpolitik, there's no appetite among European leaders to open up, not even to a country like Ukraine, who continue to be praised by our leaders for being the most European, the most compliant with European Article 2 values, but still they are not ready to make an acceleration and to actually compromise among themselves on a clear timeline. So the jury is still out. I'm not going to throw out the baby out with the baby water. I think it's an interesting idea, but it's the only one. So again, we live in a world in which we are pretty much affected by a crisis of imagination. How is it possible that hundreds, if not thousands, of people working in think tanks, in academia, they cannot come up with better ideas, more sophisticated idea than just bringing people around the table to discuss about energy and other geopolitical issue for a couple of days in Prague today? It sounds a bit, the easy answer to a very complex question, and that's why I'm not sure it's the good one.
Thank you very much, Alberto Alemanno, for your answer. And I suppose, Adam, that you would like to bounce back a question from this answer. And back to you.
Sure. Thank you very much for your this insight into your thought about the European political community. I guess on my side, I was just a little bit hopeful because the UK has agreed to attend it, and that initially Liz Truss said that she would not, and so that seems already like something of an improvement in terms of UK-EU relations. On another note, Alberto, you are one of the most iconic faces in the European bubble. Getting to interview is a prized achievement for a lot of Euro enthusiasts out there. I have interviewed another figure in this European political community, if we're going to use this word now, and that is Guillaume Clossat, who is a little bit older than you, I believe. I was wondering, was Clossat an inspiration in your work? Did you have any mentor? Where did you seek your inspiration in your work? Open Borders Institute seeks to provide, through these interviews with people like you, role models for the coming generation, people who show and embody these values of open society and also this ability to move across countries.
Yes, no doubt that since we live in a crisis of imagination, we need to encounter people are able to generate ideas, and certainly Guillaume Clossat is one of them. Is one of those Europeans who are not only a great believer in the idea of European integration as something overall positive for society and for many of us, for most of us, potentially for virtually all of us, but he's also a great connector, somebody who knows, and is being an institutional builder, is also somebody who creates permanent structure that bring together people who would not meet otherwise. So I'm very grateful to have been able to join the European Young Leader back in 2013, where I've been meeting artists, not only scholars who I probably met anyway, because that's where I come from in terms of my epistemic community, but also political leaders or wannabe political leaders who now sit, in the Irish House of Representatives, in Americans as well as Asians. So we're not only Europeans. I also met entrepreneurs. I met athletes. I met chefs, and all these people were kind of united by this unique sense that together we could have been moving the needle on a variety of issues by basically shaping Europe with our individual and collective actions. I think we need many or more of those platforms that might also have an exclusionary effect, because either you are in it or you don't even know those that exist. But the fact that they exist, they might certainly trigger, and this has been my experience, a lot of interest around these initiatives. So people asking you, how could I become part of it? How can I contribute? How could I support you? And that's where I think we should move away from this very centralized system in which, people select you to become a leader, to a system in which, well, the leaders are those who are having impact out there, and at some point you need to bring them together. So I think let impact speak for itself, as opposed to your pedigree, where you studied, and this is the idea of new power versus old power. So old power is very hierarchical, is very centralized, is something people are jealous of, whereas new power is something which is entirely decentralized, in something that is non-hierarchical, is something which is leaderless, is something that belongs to everyone, but no one, and in which each of us can find, itself in a good position to contribute. So all power is the euro, whereas the new power is Wikipedia, where everybody can create knowledge without necessarily taking credits, because we don't know what's just been updated 30 seconds ago, a Wikipedia page. So how we can move from old power to new power, knowing that today in Europe there is a coexistence of new and old, like in my Gramsci's citation earlier on, how we can move out of this interregnum? Well, I think the answer is many more fora and many more incentives for getting out of our crisis of imagination. So putting a premium on people, individuals, organizations, scholars who are actually able to create ideas that stick, the stickiness of the ideas that create impact. So let's generate many more.
You certainly are, with the Good Lobby, a huge influence on young people out there, including people who are listening to this video. Certainly it has been the case for me with Open Borders Institute. You will not mind me keeping this sentence, which I just wrote down: let impact speak for itself. I think these words are definitely something to meditate on. On a last note, do you think that we've spoken a lot about Europe? Do you think that Europe is maybe a too smaller scale for what a public sphere should be? Or you're a Rawlsian to a certain extent? Rawls, this American scholar who speaks about the global civil society. Maybe Europe is too small today, and it should rather be looking outside of itself as well.
There's no doubt we need to look outside much more. Europe has always been very Eurocentric by nature. That's its history. That's where we come from, and we need to curtail our bias towards Eurocentrism by really opening up and looking also at how Europe has been diversifying over time. Time has come to look at first, second, third generations in Europe and making sure they feel as European as those who are European since ever. There's so much richness within Europe, which has never been a very static organization in terms of society. But our mental and intellectual frame hasn't necessarily integrate those transformations. So there's a lot of catch up to be made through our educational system, through our societal issues, and try to make sure that we catch up with our mindset with the realities of Europe, which are so much richer, so much more interesting, and so much providing a bridge between the rest of the world and Europe, as opposed to the very, I would say, boring and tedious and bourgeois idea of a Europe that is basically the same as in the previous 2 centuries. No, time has to play this catch up and being creative about thinking how we can make this happen, how we can bring in, the first, second generation of migrants into politics, to bring them into the arts. How Europe would look like if the Romanians would be represented in the big cities, municipal councils like Paris or Milan, where you have, almost millions of Romanians living in the north of Italy, but nobody ever dare to run for politics. How those ideas and tradition would get into the political conversation, how much of this would open the Overton window, or what is actually possible politically to achieve and dream of in our individual and local communities, is an answer that deserves much more energy, mental energy, from our side. But we just don't see this happening. These dynamics that I often call social innovation. So it's a kind of innovation that is not driven to feed the market, but is driven by the need to address a real social need with solutions which are creative and which create capacity in the world is incredibly needed. So let's reward social innovators who really think how we can provide better solutions to ideas, not by relying on the market, but by relying on many other systems, notably society and society dynamics that are a sort of waste capital, right? Human capital in Europe, we don't really value it so much, but this could be the game changer. Give you a little example, a little homework I do. Most of my students, they no longer write master theses on abstract issue. They actually write master thesis dealing with an issue that is real and whose answer will actually serve a community. It might help a public administration, it might help a nonprofit organization, an NGOs, a think tank. It will be useful knowledge. Why don't we shift away from a model of academia, which is really far away from reality, to a model in which we're going to basically getting, two birds with one stone, right? We are learning a lot while at the same time serving our community. I'm a big believer of rediscovering human capital as a way to revamp European potential in contributing to the world and to our communities.
I have to say on this notion, indeed, of people running in politics in a different country of the EU, for instance, the Macron government, specifically the Minister of the Interior, has opposed this proposition by some other political parties to allow people to vote within the city where they were living in another country. In the EU, and so he's opposed that in France. And the last note: do you believe in a global civil society as a legal scholar? Do you believe in this Rawlsian idea, or do you think that we should rather focus first on Europe and then look at the wider scale of things?
No, I think we should look at the European, the global dimension at the same time. It would be very artificial to draw a line between the two. I think Europe today is the product of major exogenous forces and dynamics. Things are happening outside of European border, and we accept that to happen, and we're actually improving our way of living and our well-being because we are positioning ourselves in relation to what's happening out there. I see a lot of potential for civil society organization in Europe to learn from what's happening, the vivacity which is happening in Brazil, which is happening in many Asian countries, in Australia, in Latin America. I see so much happening in those regions where the problem of inequalities, the problem of access to opportunities is significantly higher than it is in Europe, and therefore the ability and the imagination of communities there is significantly higher. So there's so much back and forth to be done, and in constructing a more global outlook that doesn't artificially distinguish, what is European, what is not European. But at the same time, if you look at Civicus, which is the leading nonprofit organization representing the global civil society, you see how difficult it is to bring everybody together. But in the very same time in which the UN model is losing legitimacy and representativeness, at the same time in which multilateral relations are becoming more complicated because we live in a geopolitically shattered world, the role of global society becomes even more important. And that's why we need to cultivate those relations, which are informal by definition, but which might ensure some continuum of conversation, exchanges, and diversity that would not otherwise occur with the same frequency, because again, it's no longer a la mode.
Thank you very much, Alberto. Thank you for your time. And thank you for this work that you do, which is very inspiring, whether it's in terms of the good lobby and the social activism that you're leading, or whether it's in terms of your scholarly work, in particular with the European Journal of Risk Regulation. It's definitely been a big influence of mine. Please, to the people who listen to us, you can find this interview on YouTube, LinkedIn, and on Instagram, and you can find Alberto Alemanno's work on those 3 platforms as well. Thank you very much.